Look at you, probably can't even drive a straight car, let alone fly a plane. The arrogant businessman's voice sliced through the dim cabin, dripping with mockery. Nervous laughter flickered among the passengers, some clinging to his arrogance like it was safer than fear itself. Beside him, the black woman kept her eyes lowered, hands folded gently in her lap, her face calm amid the turbulence rattling overhead bins. A mother nearby pressed her child close as the plane jolted again. The businessman smirked wider, his tone half joking, half poison. Trust me, if the captain's looking for a hero, it won't be her. His words stung sharper than the shaking airframe itself, branding her invisible before a crowd desperate for reassurance. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe in giving bullies exactly what they deserve, hit subscribe. Now you won't want to miss what happens next. The intercom suddenly crackled, shattering the shallow chuckles. The captain's trembling voice carried through every row. Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a critical emergency. We need a trained pilot on board. Gasps erupted, fear flooding the aisles as oxygen seemed thinner, heavier. Passengers clutched seats, whispers multiplying like static, panic mounting fast. Through all the hysteria, she sat motionless, breathing evenly, eyes deep with something no one else could read. They thought she was silent because she had nothing to offer. But what came next would undo every cruel assumption and change everything. She looks more like a janitor than someone who could save a plane. The businessman scoffed, his voice rising just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. A few chuckled uncomfortably, hiding their insecurity and borrowed arrogance. The woman did not answer. She had heard those kinds of dismissals before, tones sharpened with voices that equated worth with bank accounts and the easy cruelty of people who had never seen the thresholds she had crossed. What no one in that quiet aisle knew was that beneath her simple clothes and still posture was a history forged in skies most men would never dare to enter. Years ago, she had flown sorties overseas as an Air Force fighter pilot, gripping the controls while enemy fire streaked across midnight horizons. Her colleagues used to say she flew with steel in her veins. She had returned home with medals, scars, and discipline carved into her very breath. And yet, she left it all behind for love, and her husband's accident left him needing her, and her child's recovery became her new mission. She traded combat skies for a modest civilian life. Now seated on this trembling aircraft, that same discipline lingered in her calm breathing, in the way her gaze steadied even as the bins rattled overhead. Around her wrist, half hidden by the sleeve of her cardigan, glinted a bracelet engraved with a squadron emblem. A small relic of her past, seen but dismissed by those too blinded by prejudice to believe such a story could belong to her. The businessman smirked again, jabbing the air with words. Trust me, if she had any real qualifications, she wouldn't be stuck back here in economy with the rest of us. The irony cut sharper, knowing that his arrogance would soon collapse under the very dignity he mocked. Just then a flight attendant rushed down the aisle, her face pale, her whisper urgent as she leaned toward a colleague. "We might not make it unless someone steps in." The words were half swallowed by engine groans, but those close enough heard, and fear surged fresh through the cabin. The businessman leaned smugly into his seat, but the woman's eyes sharpened. The storm, both within and outside, was far from finished. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice cracked over the intercom. "We've lost our co-pilot. Autopilot has disengaged. We need help at the controls." The cabin instantly fractured into chaos. Gasps collided with screams as passengers clutched armrests. A mother cried openly, shielding her child with trembling arms. The oxygen masks dropped briefly in a violent shudder, swinging like pendulums before retracting. The smell of fear was thick. Sweat, panic, urgency. Through it all, she sat still, steadying her breath as discipline dictated. But her silence drew the wrong eyes. The businessman beside her leaned closer, venom dripping from every syllable. "If anyone here even pretended to be a pilot, they'd step forward," he sneered, loud enough for others to nod anxiously. His eyes narrowed at her, but clearly, "Not you." The mockery spread like wildfire. A teenager whispered, "She probably hasn't even flown a car." Nervous laughter followed, people grateful to find humor in someone else's belittlement. Another passenger muttered, "She's just pretending to be calm, probably praying it's not her time to die." Each jab stripped away dignity in the eyes of the crowd, painting her silence as weakness rather than strength. The woman remained unmoved, fingers gently tightening around her bag. Her eyes, darker than the storm clouds shaking the jet, betrayed no panic, no plea, only a practiced composure no one could parse, no one wanted to believe. She had been underestimated before, brushed aside in boardrooms, mocked in waiting rooms, overlooked in every space arrogance defined. Yet no one guessed what those quiet hands had once held. The throttle of a fighter jet in combat, the fate of lives balanced between her breath and her training. The turbulence struck harder, pitching the cabin to one side, sending drinks flying and passengers shrieking. Masks jerked again as flight attendants struggled to calm the crowd. The businessman smirked, pleased at his growing audience, reveling in cowardly dominance. He leaned back smugly. "Trust me, if she had even a fraction of what it takes, we'd already be safe. She's nothing but dead weight." The woman replied with silence, but her grip on the bag deepened, knuckles taut against fabric. She seemed to anchor herself in the center of the storm, waiting. Passengers laughed nervously again, siding with certainty, choosing arrogance over faith. What none of them realized was that what she carried was not inside her luggage, but inside her past. And soon the storm that tried to cage her would watch her rise beyond every cruel word. At that moment, the plane jolted violently again, sending screams down the cabin, sealing the cliffhanger in terror. The cabin trembled once more, overhead panels rattling as the storm pressed against the aircraft like a living beast. Amid the cries, the prayers, the curses, she closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. An old ritual burned into memory from days when alarms screamed in cockpits and steel skies split with artillery fire. Where everyone else clung to panic, she reached for discipline. She visualized the horizon lines she had once trusted her life to, her body remembering before her mind even asked. Calm became her armor. A man across the aisle watched in puzzlement. His voice trembled as he leaned forward. You seem calm. Why?" A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes remained closed. "I've seen worse skies." The words hung there, gentle but laced with stories no one imagined belonged to her. A few passengers glanced toward her curiously, a flicker of confusion breaking through the mask of collective terror. Her silence was not surrender. It was gathering. The audience watching her story now could feel it, like the deep inhale before a swell of music, like the shadows thickening before dawn. She was not broken. She was centering herself. As the businessman laughed again, she opened her eyes, steady and unblinking. Her lips barely moved, but the words escaped like a secret she told only to the raging storm outside. "Not yet. Before we begin, tell me where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe in giving bullies exactly what they deserve, hit subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. The jet lurched violently, a shuddering drop that sent gasps crashing through the cabin. Drink carts toppled, cups skittered across the floor, and a chorus of screams rose as oxygen masks trembled against their housings. Warning tones blared from the cockpit beyond the sealed door, piercing, relentless like a metronome of fear. Crew members rushed with forced reassurances, but their faces betrayed panic, their trembling hands clutching the seatbacks for balance. Piercing and the businessman seized the moment as though chaos was a stage carved for his ego. Standing half-turned in the aisle, he waved his arms dramatically, voice pitched in mock authority. I've flown plenty of private jets. Trust me, we're not in danger. It just needs steady hands. He barked nonsense instructions at the attendants, trying to command them as though his money made him captain. Passengers latched onto his bravado, confusing arrogance for competence, clinging to any raft in the storm. Children cried louder, their wails cutting through the false confidence, yet still the cabin leaned toward his bluster rather than truth. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe in giving bullies exactly what they deserve, hit subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. She sat motionless, the storm reflected in her gaze. Slowly, deliberately, she loosened her seatbelt an inch, a movement so subtle most missed it. To her, it was ritual, preparation, a shift from civilian posture to familiar readiness. Her expression changed, eyes narrowing as if measuring the rhythm of the turbulence itself. But the crowd only saw stillness without context. What's she going to do, pray louder? A boy jeered across the aisle, laughter brittle in his throat. The businessman smiled at their mockery, feeding on it, puffing his chest larger. See, at least I stand up, not sit pretending. Her calm deepened. The years of training that once steadied her under missile fire returned in silence, in calculation written only in her breath. Where others shook, she inhaled precisely. Where others shouted, she absorbed every note of fear, centering it like a compass pointing toward action. Contrasts sharpened in the audience's eyes, his arrogance swelling, her dignity a steady flame in shadow. The plane bucked again, a steep tilt that toppled a baby stroller from the overhead bin, sending shouts across the cabin. Hope withered into near despair. An attendant, face pale as paper, stumbled forward, clutching the intercom microphone with white knuckles. From the cockpit came the voice that sliced through noise and false bravado alike. The captain's voice carrying a plea that folded under its own desperation. Is there any fighter pilot aboard? Please, anyone. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The captain's plea still echoed through the cabin when, quietly, she unlatched her belt and rose. The motion was steady, unfaltering, like a tide swelling upward. Gasps rippled in waves as passengers turned to stare, disbelieving that the quiet black woman who had remained unnoticed would stand now, of all times. The businessman erupted in cruel laughter, his voice booming louder than the alarm bells still blinking above. You! Don't waste our time. Sit down before you make a fool of yourself. His derision drew nervous, passengers clinging to mockery because it felt safer than hope. But she did not answer him. Instead, she tugged her sleeve back just enough for light to catch on the metal at her wrist. An engraved bracelet gleamed, an emblem of Air Command etched permanently there. It spoke not of trinkets, but of battles survived. A man 2 rows back leaned forward, his eyes widening. The silver in his hair betrayed a life once lived in uniform. He whispered hoarsely to his wife, "Wait, that's real." His voice cracked with recognition, but the rest of the crowd wavered on the edge of doubt. She didn't wait for belief. With measured steps, she walked down the aisle, each stride cutting through laughter, sneers, and panic alike. Children hushed. Some passengers whispered, "Delusional." Others whispered, "Could it be?" The businessman muttered louder, desperate to drown her out. "She's pretending. We're doomed if she touches the cockpit." She never looked back. Hand brushing the bracelet once more, she pressed forward, past the attendants, frozen between fear and hesitation. Her hand reached for the cockpit door. The metal creaked slowly on its hinges, a sound so sharp in the silence it sent shivers across the cabin. The door eased shut behind her, slicing tension, leaving the crowd suspended on the edge of dread and dawning hope. The cockpit was chaos. Alarms shrieked in a relentless chorus. Warning lights flared red across the control panels, and the storm outside clawed at the fuselage with savage force. The co-pilot lay unconscious, slumped against his harness, while the captain's trembling hands moved frantically across switches that had ceased to obey. Into this hurricane of panic, she stepped with a calm that seemed impossibly out of place. She slid into the vacant seat, fingers brushing against familiar instruments with the ease of one greeting an old friend. Muscle memory surged to rue her as her hands danced confidently across controls that had once been her lifeline. The flight attendants exchanged wide-eyed looks, one whispering in disbelief, She knows what she's doing." Beyond the cockpit doors, the businessman's mocking laughter rang out like a grating bell. "She's delusional. This is suicide." His voice rose to fill the silence of those too terrified to speak, clinging to derision as if certainty could keep them alive. But then, the crackle of the intercom replaced his sneers. Passengers froze as her voice filled the cabin, steady, strong, and deliberate. "This is Lieutenant Colonel, name, former United States Air Force Fighter Squadron," she said. "I have the controls now." The words detonated like thunder. Gasps swallowed the cabin whole. Phones that had been recording for mockery now streamed tears and awe. A woman covered her mouth. A man whispered, "Dear God." Children clutched parents tighter, their terror briefly replaced with reverence. The businessman turned pale, his lips working soundlessly as his face crumbled into disbelief. Back at the controls, she pulled the yoke firmly, her eyes locked on instruments as the storm's turbulence pitched the aircraft sideways. Her voice rang crisp as she commanded the captain and attendants with confidence forged in fire. "Recalibrate flaps, stabilize hydraulics, and set vectors now." Her words cut through panic like a blade, restoring rhythm where chaos had reigned. The captain obeyed instinctively, relief tangible in his trembling hands. The fuselage groaned as the jet pierced a violent downdraft. She adjusted with a precision born only from combat skies, her eyes scanning mast indicators, her hands coaxing obedience from machinery others had surrendered to. Sweat dripped down mechanics in the cabin, prayers echoed in trembling whispers. Yet in the cockpit, her presence steadied every heartbeat. Rain lashed against the windshield, but her gaze never faltered. Through the storm's curtain, the glow of runway lights appeared, flickering like distant salvation. She aligned the craft. With controlled breath, her landing gear engaging with a metallic clunk that reverberated hope through the airframe. In the cabin, passengers clasped hands and cried openly, their disbelief turning to awe. Phones live streaming broadcast exclamations, "Unbelievable! She's saving us!" The descent grew rougher, clouds sparking with static discharge, but her control was unshaken. She whispered a quiet mantra only she could hear, a remnant of missions long gone, then straightened against the seat. The wheels screeched violently as they struck tarmac, the entire vessel jolting like a titan awakened. For a moment, time fractured into stunned silence, a breathless void where no one moved, no one spoke, until the cabin erupted into sobs, applause, and gasps of exhausted relief. They had mocked her as nothing. Now they knew her as everything. The jet finally dragged to a halt on the slick runway, its tires screeching one last protest before settling into silence. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the cabin erupted in a chorus of sobs and shouts, relief pouring from every throat. Strangers who had clung to seats now clung to each other, hugging fiercely as if embracing life itself. Children burrowed into their parents' arms, grateful they had landed safely. Even the cabin crew, still shaking from the ordeal, turned toward the cockpit door with tears slipping down their cheeks, whispering over and over, "Thank you, God, thank you." She emerged, composed but weary, her face illuminated by the faint glow of cabin lights. Passengers shot to their feet, applause cascading around her like a tidal wave. Their eyes, moments earlier blind with doubt, shone with awe and shame. The attendants rushed forward first, clasping her hands as though anchoring themselves to the very strength that had steadied the skies. One stammered, You saved us all," as another simply bowed her head, in gratitude. Among the flood of gratitude, the businessman attempted to slip into the stream of people disembarking, his expression pale, eyes refusing to meet hers. But this time the passengers found their voices. "Where are you running?" one demanded. Another spat. "You mock the very woman who saved your life." Murmurs of rebuke circled him, their righteous indignation small justice for the venom he spewed earlier. He shrank beneath their rebuke, his arrogance reduced to dust. But she didn't glance his way. Refusing to indulge in pettiness, she walked quietly back to her seat where a frightened child sobbed into her mother's chest. Kneeling, she rested a calming hand on the child's shoulder, whispering words too soft to carry, but strong enough to soothe. And just like that, tension unraveled into peace. The applause ebbed into quiet respect, passengers watching her not as spectacle but as proof that quiet power lives unseen among them. She settled once again, folding her hands with silent discipline. The camera of the moment lingered, all focus on her calm, still eyes. True heroism, it seemed, did not shout, it simply endured. The cabin's cries of relief slowly dissolved into a hushed reverence, leaving space for reflection to settle like calm after thunder. In that silence, the truth became undeniable. Arrogance and prejudice had almost cost every soul on board their lives. The loudest voices in the room, the ones that mocked, belittled, and judged based only on appearance, crumbled into shame when confronted with the quiet force of true capability. It was not the man who shouted the loudest or boasted of money and influence who saved them. It was the woman they dismissed, the one who carried herself with discipline forged in silence, dignity, not arrogance, poise, not pride. True leadership is never about volume or ego. It reveals itself only in critical moments where an action eclipses rhetoric and character eclipses cruelty. And so the lesson lingers. Never underestimate someone because of where they sit, how they look, or how quietly they move through the world. Among us, heroes walk unnoticed, heroes who may already have braved storms we cannot even imagine, waiting for no recognition, only prepared to rise when humanity calls. Never forget, respect must be earned by actions, not demanded by arrogance. Share this story if you believe respect should be given, not mocked. Subscribe for more justice stories that remind us true strength is often hidden in plain sight.